What if I told you that the Democrat Party and the liberal establishment have always been for infanticide? What if I told you that for the last few decades, the Democrat Party has not just been pro-abortion, they've been pro-infanticide. We call this fourth trimester abortions. This claim has been labeled a conspiracy theorist claim by tin hat wearing ultra MAGA QAnon theorists who don't know anything, and they're just stupid backwoods idiots. In fact, you'll find Reuters fact checks saying that no Democrat policies have ever allowed the killing of infants after birth. We're coming with the facts today. We're coming with the history today. We're coming with a warning to you that if you tolerate the killing of babies in the womb, you will eventually begin entertaining and having conversations about killing that baby after birth. Where does it stop? We're going to get into all today at the Seth Gruber Show. Buckle up. This is the Seth Gruber Show. For a long, long time, conservatives and pro-life Americans have argued that if it's okay to kill a baby through the point of birth, then there's no reason why the infant directly after birth should be protected. In other words, there's no magical birth canal that somehow confers personhood. It's not like the birth canal has a fetus fairy that sprinkles magical personhood conferring fairy dust on the child as it exits the birth canal. That by allowing and entertaining the legality of killing babies through all 9 months of pregnancy in utero, we will inevitably end up at a conversation about fourth trimester abortions. Call it infanticide. And in the lead up to the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022, we saw states begin to pass legislation that used very murky and open-ended language that would suggest that the child directly after birth and in the first few days after birth could be neglected or allowed to die, and there would be no legal penalty or consequences either to the parents or to the doctor or quote-unquote abortionist. And this horrified Americans, and it was labeled, of course, as fake news, and fact-check and Reuters jumped into full steam to say that no laws proposed by Democrats at the state or federal level would allow babies who have already been born to be killed. We're going to give you a history behind exactly how long Democrats on the left have been pushing to legalize infanticide, to codify it, or to make it really murky so that you can kill babies after birth and nothing will happen. Okay? And we said for decades that this is where the conversation about abortion would inevitably go. Back to ancient pagan eras that would kill infants, babies right after birth. If you can kill them through all 9 months, why not right after? What's so value-giving, after all, about a 6-inch journey through the birth canal that moves the baby from the uterus to the doctor's waiting hands? What's so significant about that 6-inch journey that transforms the baby from a non-person with no right to life to an individual and a person that you can be killed if you kill the baby? These are the questions you're not supposed to ask. We're going to get into all of it right now because Democrats have actually always supported infanticide. Now, I'm not saying all Democrats, okay? I don't want these lame critiques, people telling me that, oh, you're saying every Democrat. I have Democrat friends. I have Democrats that are pro-life that don't believe it. I mean the party, okay? The party platform and the sort of political and intellectual drivers of the Democrat Party have always pushed for and supported infanticide. You might remember in 2022, California, my old home state, was doing this with AB 2223. They were trying to essentially remove any penalties on a mother whose baby died due to miscarriage, abortion, or perinatal death. And you look up perinatal death, and it can refer to a baby up to 28 days after birth. Maryland did the same thing. They said babies could be killed 28 days after birth under a new proposed Maryland law in 2022. It was Senate Bill 669, also known as the Pregnant Persons Freedom Act. We used to have a word for pregnant persons. It was woman. That's right, woman. And the Senate Bill 669 said the bill also proposes a revision of the fetal murder manslaughter statute that would serve to handcuff the investigation of this is attorney Olivia Summers sort of analyzing the bill, that would serve to handcuff the investigation of infant deaths unrelated to abortion. Yeah, and this is because the legislation prohibits investigations and criminal prosecutions for women and medical professionals for a, quote, failure to act in relation to a perinatal death. So what's a failure to act and what's a perinatal death? Well, perinatal death can be the death of a baby up to 28 days after birth, almost the first full month of the infant's life. Infant just referring to a baby outside of the womb. Of the infant outside of the womb. And a failure to act would mean you just did nothing to care for the baby. So, in other words, as ACLJ attorney Olivia Summers says, a baby born alive and well could be abandoned and left to starve or freeze to death, and nothing could be done to punish those who participated in that cruel death. She said that the language in this Maryland law from a couple years ago is unclear, so the law could be interpreted to, quote, prevent investigations into the death of infants at least 7 days after their birth and may extend to infants as old as 4 weeks old. And of course, both in the California example and in Maryland, the law did not define what perinatal meant. So a 2020 law did define what perinatal meant as, quote, the provision of care during pregnancy, labor and delivery, and postpartum and neonatal periods. But a definition on Medicine Net, a website owned by WebMD, defines perinatal as the 20th to 28th week of gestation to 1 to 4 weeks after birth. Okay, so there you have it. Now, we're going to go into just a little bit of the history behind the Democrat Party's push for infanticide, but this was just in 2022, okay? And now with states allowed to codify abortion through point of birth into their state constitution or to ban abortion, thanks to the overturning of Roe versus Wade, we're going to see more states like California and Maryland move to remove penalties for women or doctors who allow, through neglect of care, the death of an infant or actively kill that child after it's born. Because, hey, what if there's something wrong with the baby and they didn't know about that in utero through prenatal testing? Maybe we should let the kid die, okay? Like, these things have happened in America, okay? And so if there are no penalties for a mom who helps kill or refuses to care for and therefore kills her infant, that incentivizes more parents who are deranged and sick in the mind to do that to their own children. Peter Singer, someone we've talked about on this show a lot, is one of the architects of our culture of death. Peter Singer is a philosopher at Princeton. He's, I believe, an Australian. He's something late 80 or 90-year-old communist fart. And he's very famous for defending abortion through the point of birth and beyond. In other words, he was philosophically articulating and defending what's now actually happening politically at many state levels, okay, like Maryland and California. And he admits what I just said at the beginning of this episode, which is that if you can kill the baby through the point of birth, and that should be legal, then there's clearly nothing that significant that happens during childbirth that would change that formula or change the status of the preborn child. Does that make sense? Let me say it in another language. If there's nothing that the child possesses in the 9th month that would grant them personhood, then they certainly wouldn't attain that lacking thing in the 1 hour or 4 hours of childbirth wherein they come into the world and into the doctor's waiting hands. There's nothing that happens during childbirth that didn't happen in the 9th month that would suddenly grant the child a right to life. So if it's moral, ethical, and legal to kill the baby through all 9 months of pregnancy through legalized abortion, then you should be able to kill the baby directly after birth. You really should. Because where one is has no bearing on who one is. So if the child is not a rights-bearing individual, is not a person in the 9th month, then they clearly aren't right after birth either. So the way Peter Singer says it is he says, these qualities that I say confer personhood, says Peter Singer, that are lacking in the 9-month-old fetus are also lacking in the newborn child. So then both the infant and the third trimester child would both be disqualified from the community of persons and from personhood and a right to life. Here's how he's put it. He says, Peter Singer says, the liberal search for a morally crucial dividing line between the newborn baby and the fetus has failed to yield any event or stage of development that can bear the weight of separating those with a right to life from those who lack such a right. In other words, he's saying we have this liberal search for this like really clear line, this really clear line between the unborn baby and the born baby, so that we can say it's okay to kill the unborn baby, but it's not okay to kill the born baby. And what's he say? This liberal search for a morally crucial dividing line between the newborn and the unborn, that search has failed to yield any event or stage of development which can bear the weight of separating those with a right to life from those who do not have a right to life. In other words, if you can kill the 9-month-old baby, you can kill the infant too. He's actually intellectually consistent, although his ideologies take him to a heinous, horrific, and disgusting conclusion. But there has been a long political push to legalize the killing of infants or to not actually enforce any criminal punishments for those who kill infants. There was a Supreme Court decision called Bowen versus American Hospital Association from 1986. And the American Hospital Association, the AHA, joined by the American Medical Association, the AMA, brought the lawsuit against the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, that is the HHS, and its then director Otis Bowen, hence Bowen versus American Hospital. And the lawsuit was to have a series of requirements for neonatal care struck down. These requirements for babies, neonatal care, the first set of baby doe rules were created by the HHS in the Reagan administration in 1983. The rules mandated that all federally funded hospitals provide maximal treatment to handicapped infants and report any case where parental consent is withheld if medical neglect is suspected. However, the Supreme Court decision in 1986 was in a 5-3 decision. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Congress never intended for that section of the code to address an infant's civil rights, and that the clause cannot be invoked without evidence of discrimination. In other words, they supported striking down the requirements for neonatal care. So Thurgood Marshall, who's been celebrated by both the left and the right, was one of the Supreme Court justices who joined the rest of the justices in essentially saying that the same rights of privacy contained in Roe v. Wade now entailed the exclusive private right of the family to determine whether their newborn child had a life worth living or a life worth preserving. In other words, it's a privacy right for a doctor and a parent to have a conversation about whether to let an infant die or not. Then in 1983, we had a Supreme Court decision called Planned Parenthood v. Ashcroft. And in the testimony of one Dr. Robert Christ, that was his last name, he said the abortion patient has a right not only to be rid of the growth called a fetus in her body, but also has a right to a dead fetus. In other words, the right to abortion is actually the right to a dead child. Because if you pay for an abortion, what are you paying for? You're paying for a dead baby. You're paying for a dead child. So what happens if an abortion fails and the baby's born alive in a botched failed abortion procedure? Then you didn't get what you paid for, right? Hey, I paid for an abortion. I paid for a dead kid. And this baby was just born alive. So what? So you need to kill the infant that's now born. And we have evidence, by the way, that this has happened in America. We know from the testimonies of pro-lifers that have uncovered infanticide, from former abortionists who have discussed cutting open the chests of babies born alive outside of the womb with their hearts still beating, that infanticide does still occur with babies who survive botched failed abortion attempts. And the Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell responded to this admission from Dr. Robert Christ, saying that the patient has a right not only to be rid of the fetus, but has a right to a dead fetus, calling this argument to be remarkable in its candor. The Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell said, that's remarkable in its candor. It's very honest what you're saying there. But remarkably wrong? No, Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell never said that it was remarkably wrong or heinous or evil, just remarkable in its candor, okay? So the Supreme Court has tolerated or green-lighted or allowed the neglect of infants already born. And then we get to Bill Clinton and the partial birth abortion era. Well, partial birth abortions are now illegal in America, but it wasn't always such. And Bill Clinton vetoed the ban on partial birth abortions many years ago, okay? And this was 1995. December 7th, 1995, the Senate passed the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act. After some back and forth over different versions of the bill, the House passed the bill with some clarifying amendments on March 26, 1996. And on April 10th, 1996, Bill Clinton vetoed the bill. By the way, there were 54 yeses, and the Republicans who voted no were 8. The Democrats who voted no were 46. The Republicans who voted yes were 45, and the Democrats who voted yes were 9. Okay? So in other words, 46 Democrats said, we don't want to protect babies from partial birth abortions. 45 Republicans said, we do want to protect babies from partial birth abortions. 9 Democrats said, we do want to protect babies from partial birth abortions. And 8 Republicans said, we don't want to protect babies from partial birth abortions. So it was basically split along party lines, with a few going over to the other side. And on April 10th, Bill Clinton vetoed that bill. Thank you to our friends and sponsor at Every Life Diaper Company, everylife.com, America's pro-life diaper company. We like babies, right? We talk about saving babies. Well, every major diaper company in America rhetorically or financially supports the killing of babies. So they enrich themselves when more babies are born because they can sell them diapers. And then they turn around and they support killing the same babies whose declining birth rate will be the bankruptcy of their company. I don't know. Make it make sense. We have to fund a culture of life to replace this culture of death we're living in. One easy way to do that is to fight with your wallet. Everylife.com is where you should get your diapers. Everylife.com, promo code Seth10, Seth10, that's Seth10 for 10% off your first order. Your church nursery, just go play this clip right now for your church nursery. Stop buying from Huggies. Stop buying from the pro-abortion diaper companies. Go to everylife.com. Your grandkids, your kids, your nieces, your nephews, your cousins, everyone should be going to everylife.com. Promo code Seth10 for 10% off your first order. Let them know that we sent you. And if you sign up for the subscription model, which me and my wife do, you save a little extra money as well. All right, let's support life by giving our money to life-affirming, baby-loving diaper companies at everylife.com. There was a record of a partial birth abortion that was read, I believe, in Congress at one point. And Dr. Martin Haskell, who was the creator of the partial birth abortion procedure, described exactly what happens in a partial birth abortion. I just want you to capture and understand the infanticidal agenda that has been par for the course for our Democrat Party in America for a long, long time. The inventor of partial birth abortion said, with the lower extremity of the fetus in the vagina, the surgeon uses his fingers to deliver the opposite lower extremity, then the torso, the shoulders, and the upper extremities. The skull lodges at the internal cervical. Usually there is not enough dilation for it to pass through. The fetus is oriented dorsal or spine up. At this point, the right-handed surgeon slides the finger of his left hand along the back of the fetus and hooks the shoulders of the fetus with the index and ring fingers. Next, he slides the tip of the middle finger along the spine toward the skull skull while applying traction to the shoulders and lower extremities. The middle finger lifts and pushes the anterior cervical lip out of the way. While maintaining this tension, lifting the cervix, and applying traction to the shoulders with the fingers of the left hand, the surgeon takes a pair of blunt, curved Metzenbaum scissors in the right hand. He carefully advances the tip curved down along the spine and uses this middle finger until he feels it contact the base of the skull under the tip of his middle finger. The surgeon then forces the scissors into the base of the skull or into the foramen magnum. Having safely entered the skull, he spreads the scissors to enlarge the opening. The surgeon removes the scissors and introduces a suction catheter into the hole and evacuates the skull's contents. With a catheter in place, he applies traction to the fetus, removing it completely from the patient. You just heard description of murder. That's infanticide. That child is nearly out of the birth canal entirely. And you basically do the closest thing to a decapitation of a baby that you possibly could. Of course, allowing the partial birth abortion ban to pass and become law would have acknowledged the humanity of the child and the injuries it sustained during an abortion. Bill Clinton couldn't have that. He couldn't acknowledge legislatively that it's wrong to kill a baby 50% out of the uterus, out of the birth canal. Because if you do that, you clearly have to protect the child right before the process called birth starts, which then starts to unravel the entire myth of choice. And if the child halfway out of the birth canal is a person with value whose murder is atrocious and indefensible, how is that same child minutes, days, or weeks before exiting the birth canal not a person with human rights? Hadley Arkes, the founder and director of the James Wilson Institute of Natural Rights, helps us understand Clinton's strategy at this time of what I call sticking his head fully in the sand and denying the existence of any reality that might compromise the fictional right to abortion. Hadley Arkes said, Bill Clinton could look out on the experience of a partial birth abortion and apparently never see a child whose skull was being crushed and whose head was being collapsed as the contents of the skull were being suctioned out. That child made no impression on Clinton's visual or perceptual screen because the injuries suffered by this small being simply could not be allowed to count. Both the victims and the injuries had to be filtered out by the theory that came along with abortion rights. For that notion of rights could not be sustained while there was a recognition of a separate human being suffering injuries that were lethal. And by the way, a lot of Democrats at the time said the only reason they supported partial birth abortion was to save mom's life. They said there are some circumstances where you have to do a partial birth abortion to save mom's life. That's the only form or type of abortion that you could do to save mom's life in a life-threatening pregnancy. But that's not true as well, by the way. Former Surgeon General Everett C. Koop wrote a letter to the editor of the New York Times in 1996, and he said, with all that modern medicine has to offer, partial birth abortions are not needed to save the life of the mother, and the procedure's impact on a woman's cervix can put future pregnancies at risk. Pamela Smith, a Department of OBGYN at Mount Sinai Hospital in Chicago, said there are absolutely no obstetrical situations encountered in this country which would require partial birth abortions to preserve the life or health of the mother. And she adds two more risks: cervical incompetence and subsequent pregnancies caused by 3 days of forceful dilation of the cervix, and uterine rupture caused by rotating the fetus in the womb. In other words, it actually ends up being more dangerous for mom. Daniel Johnson, a MD, wrote a letter to the editor in the New York Times in 1997, said our panel could not find any identified circumstance in which the procedure was the only safe and effective abortion method. The American Medical Association supported the federal ban on partial birth abortions passed by Congress and vetoed by President Clinton. And then we get to the year 2000, another piece of the story in the Democrat Party's long fascination with supporting and enabling the killing of infants. Stenberg v. Carhart, a Supreme Court decision in 2000, Stenberg v. Carhart, was a 5-4 decision that ruled that Nebraska's ban on partial birth abortions was unconstitutional. So Nebraska had banned partial birth abortions. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and in a 5-4 decision, they said that Nebraska could not enforce their ban on partial birth abortions. And 5 of the Supreme Court justices that ruled to strike it down, I bet you can't guess: Stephen Breyer, Stevens, O'Connor, Sandra Day O'Connor, Soter, and Ginsburg, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Shocker. And then Bush later finally signed the partial birth abortion ban in 2003. There were 64 voting yes, 34 voting no, and 2 not voting. Guess how many Republicans voted no? 3. Guess how many Democrats voted no? 31. 31 voted no, we don't want to ban partial birth abortions. That was 2003. And then in 2007, we had Gonzales v. Carhart, which re-examined Bush's ban on partial birth abortions. And in 2007, in Gonzales v. Carhart, they were looking to whether they should uphold the ban on partial birth abortions or reverse it. It ended up staying, and we kept our ban on partial birth abortions. But guess who voted to overturn the ban? Stephen Breyer, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stevens, and Soter. So, by the way, guess who was clerking for Stephen Breyer and helping him author and do the research for the Gonzales v. Carhart to try to overturn the ban on partial birth abortions and make that grisly procedure of nearly chopping off the baby's head in utero legal again? Ketanji Jackson, our most recent Supreme Court justice, who Jackie Hill Perry, the Christian author and speaker, celebrated like a clapping seal when Ketanji Jackson became a Supreme Court justice, who was clerking for Stephen Breyer when together they were trying to re-legalize the decapitation of infants half delivered during childbirth. And that brought us to 2019. You may recall former Virginia Governor Ralph Northam had a Democrat legislator named Kathy Tran who had proposed a reproductive health act, kind of like New York, that was going to legalize abortion through the point of birth in the state of Virginia. And the judge asked Kathy Tran about his bill, about what it would do. And he said, would it allow abortions through point of birth? And she wouldn't answer the question. So he pressed more, and he said, okay, she's dilating. Let's say this woman's dilating. She's getting ready to give birth. Would your bill allow her to request an abortion at that point? And Virginia legislator Kathy Tran kind of cringed, like she didn't want to give her own answer. And she said, yes, my bill would allow that. This led the governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam at the time, to get in hot water because he was asked about his Democrat Party friend representative, her bill. And he was asked on a radio show what would happen if like a baby like was born alive, like during a third trimester botched failed abortion. And he said, well, we'd make the baby comfortable. We'd resuscitate the baby if that's what the mother wanted. And then the mother and the doctor would have a conversation. It's like, wait, what? Resuscitate the baby if that's what the mother wanted, and then they'd have a conversation about what? About what to do with the infant, about whether to kill the infant or let the baby die. It's like, oh, whoa. So this led Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse to author the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, which just said if a baby was born alive during a botched failed abortion, that you had to care for the baby, you had to transfer the baby to a hospital and give them the same level of medical attention and care that any other baby would receive born under normal circumstances and at the same gestational age. Very simple, okay? Well, guess what? Pelosi, the grandmother of Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry and the Democrat Party, they vetoed that bill like over 90 times. Over 90. Nearly 100 times they vetoed a bill that would have not curtailed the right to kill babies in the womb. It just would have applied more penalties and consequences to allowing babies already born to die or to actively kill them. What does that communicate to you? What is the Democrat Party communicating and admitting if they veto a bill that doesn't even stop the killing of babies in the womb? It just applies more penalties to make sure that you don't kill or allow babies to die outside the womb. They're communicating to you what they've been communicating to you for decades in today's Democrat Party, which is they are totally on board with and okay with infanticide. They have no problem with it. It's just that Peter Singer says the quiet part out loud. He speaks for the whole movement when he says, well, yeah, I mean, the liberal search for this dividing line between unborn babies and infants, that search has failed to yield any significance or event or development that would make it okay to kill the baby in the womb, but not outside the womb. So let's just kill them all. Let's kill the babies in the womb. Let's kill the babies outside of the womb, maybe up until they're 1 year old. The architects of this ideology and the thought leaders of the abortion industry are saying what none of the other Moloch priests in the Democrat Party will say, which is, yeah, we're kind of okay with killing babies after they're born too, because they're not persons in the womb and they're not persons outside the womb. So when we say the Democrat Party is pushing infanticide, the Democrat Party is pushing fourth trimester abortions, the Democrat Party and the abortion industry are okay with killing babies, not just through point of birth, but after the child is born too. Don't go to Reuters or the Washington Post on how many Pinocchios that those claims are getting from the radical right wing. Just look at their own legislation. I just gave you a 30-minute history on how long they've been pushing infanticide. Okay? They're not more progressive than any of their demonic pagan ancestors. They're pushing the same ideas. And every society in human history has eventually been destroyed by sexual chaos and infanticide. In fact, nearly every human civilization in human history exercised human sacrifice at one point or another. We are not that different. Now, our ideals are different. The ideas that founded this country are different and unique and beautiful. But the heart is deceitfully wicked. Human nature has not changed. And we are just regressing and returning to the same kinds of actions and the same kinds of evils that always destroyed societies and civilizations. And today, those ideas have a welcome, cush home in the Democrat Party. And if you stand against that, you're the problem. If you stand against that and you say maybe we shouldn't be killing babies inside or outside the womb, you're a Christian nationalist. You're the threat to democracy. You hate women. And they tell pro-life women they're a traitor to their own sex, because if you're a female, you don't want to kill babies in the womb. Apparently, you're not a feminist and you're not a real woman. It's ridiculous. I thought you might appreciate the specificities and airtight case to prove that these ideas never stop with the unborn. They will be applied to babies outside the womb as well, which means that they will be applied to you one day too, actually. If they'll kill unborn babies and infants and not punish the killing of either of those children, how much longer until your dehumanization, your discrimination, your mistreatment is just part of the liberal orthodoxy and what we have to do to be truly free, to be in a liberal utopia? Those Christians preaching their Bibles are just going to have to be Untermensch and Lebensinwertensleben and life unworthy of life and undesirables and unfit, because they're threatening the liberal establishment, just like the unborn threatens the liberal establishment, because they believe that they have the right to orgasms without responsibility. And if that responsibility happens to be called a baby, then they are unwanted and a burden to the kind of lifestyle that they want to live. So how much longer until anyone is redefined as a burden to the lifestyle that the elites want to live and those who accrue and hold political power? Do you see? Do you see now? All of this is integrated. It's all of it's connected. And if you don't recognize that, you're not willing to stand against that, don't be surprised one day when knock, 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 that ideology is knocking on your front door. The mob and the culture of death are at your front door because we tolerated those bad ideas for so long. It's time to wake up, guys. It's time for common sense Americans, Christian or not, to say, this is insane, this is evil, this is stupid, that's nonsense. And we're not going to put up with it anymore. It's going to take people at the local level resisting evil, pushing back, not just being on the defensive, but being on the offensive and taking back ground, getting the right people elected, voting for the right policies and ideas, speaking the truth and not giving a square inch to this demonic agenda that for decades, as I just proved to you, has been very comfortable with murdering babies already born. It doesn't get any more evil than that, my friends. Thank you guys for tuning in today. Come back every Tuesday and Thursday for new episodes. Subscribe at iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and Rumble. Give us a rating and review. Hit subscribe. Hit the notifications bell on YouTube. And go subscribe at Rumble for if I'm ever digitally assassinated by the YouTube overlords. Give us 5 stars on iTunes podcasts and leave us a review. Let us know what you think about the show. We really appreciate it. It helps us reach more people. And if you want to join the fastest growing pro-life organization in America to take back life, wake up the church, put our organization out of a job, by getting the church back engaged with the duties that she should have been doing all along to end abortion and all of these evils in our society. Go to thewhiterose.life. You can sign up as an ally at $35 a month, and you get a resistance box to equip you for resistance in the mail, and our digital community. Hang out with me online. We have a pro-life course. We have a pro-life masterclass coming out. And $70 a month gets you our book club. So you actually hang out with me. We read a book, and we talk about it live on Zoom once a month. We need your help to take back life in America and reawaken the church before it's too late. Until next week, I'm Seth Gruber, and this is The Seth Gruber Show.